Your next car's battery isn't just an engineering problem, it's a geopolitical weapon. While everyone's obsessing over range anxiety and charging times, the real threat is sitting right under the floor pan: who controls the materials, who builds the cells, and what happens when they decide to turn off the tap. 3 supply chain vulnerabilities make your EV a liability you can't control. We're talking rare earth strangleholds, manufacturing black holes, and materials that come from countries one coup away from cutting you off completely. Let's start with the materials problem nobody wants you to see. China processes 85% of the world's rare earth elements. That includes 95% of dysprosium refining and 85% of neodymium and praseodymium. Every single EV motor on the road needs 1 to 2 kilograms of neodymium iron boron magnets to function. China makes 75% of them globally. In April 2025, Beijing tightened the screws. Export controls hit processing technologies hard. 30 to 60-day approval delays became standard. They extended quotas to imported raw materials, meaning even if you mine rare earths somewhere else, you're still running through Chinese processors to turn ore into usable material. Take Mountain Pass in California. It's one of the few non-Chinese rare earth mines producing about 15% of global concentrates. But here's the problem. They ship the ore to China for processing because the expertise to refine it into battery-grade material lies there. We outsourced the knowledge decades ago, and now we're paying the price. Beijing increased rare earth stockpiles by 15 to 20% in 2024. They didn't announce public mining quotas for 2025. That's not market management, that's strategic consolidation. When you control the reserves and the processing, you control the entire supply chain. Here's the racing parallel. Imagine NASCAR if one supplier controlled 85% of all engine blocks. Every team would be at their mercy. One bad relationship, one policy shift, and your entire season's dead in the water. That's where we are with EV motors right now. The top 3 global magnet manufacturers source over 60% of their inputs from Chinese processors. It doesn't matter if the final assembly happens in Japan or Germany, the critical materials flow through Beijing's hands first. Now, some people will say diversification efforts are underway. Australia's Linus is expanding. MP Materials is building processing capacity in the US. But these projects need neodymium prices at $25 to $30 per kilogram just to break even. Prices recently dropped 40%. When the economics don't work, expansion stalls. The timelines are brutal. We're talking 5 to 10 years before meaningful capacity comes online outside China, assuming everything goes perfectly. No permitting delays, no environmental pushback, no financing issues. In racing, we call that optimistic engineering, and it usually doesn't survive first contact with reality. China's not sitting still either. State-owned enterprises are consolidating control over domestic production. The government's pushing vertical integration from mining to magnet manufacturing. They're not just protecting market share, they're weaponizing it. Every EV sold today depends on this supply chain. Tesla, Ford, GM, Volkswagen, Toyota, doesn't matter. The magnets in those motors came from the same concentrated source. One export restriction, one trade dispute, and production lines go dark. The real kicker, this isn't even about the batteries yet. We're just talking about the motors. The batteries themselves create an even bigger choke point, and that's where things get truly dangerous. China refines 70 to 80% of the world's lithium and cobalt into battery-grade materials. They don't just mine it, they control the processing infrastructure that turns raw ore into something you can actually put in a battery cell. That's the choke point everyone misses. CATL and BYD own global lithium iron phosphate battery production. Ford's new Michigan plant, it licenses CATL technology. Critics called it a Trojan horse the day it was announced, and they weren't wrong. You're building domestic capacity using a competitor's intellectual property and supply chain. That's not independence, that's dependence with extra steps. The US needs 50 gigawatt hours of battery capacity in 2025. Europe needs 70. Both regions are scrambling to import cells or betting on startups that haven't proven they can scale production. Meanwhile, China's pumping out batteries faster than the rest of the world combined. July 2025 changed everything. The Inflation Reduction Act rollback killed the $7,500 EV tax credit. Battery costs jumped to $95 per kilowatt hour. U.S. manufacturing became uncompetitive overnight unless you slap massive tariffs on Chinese imports, and we're talking 60% tariffs, just to level the playing field on lithium iron phosphate cells. Here's where it gets interesting. Michigan and Illinois voters recalled local officials who approved Chinese battery plants in their communities. Goshen tried to build facilities in both states. Local politicians thought they were bringing jobs and economic development. Voters saw through it and threw them out of office. The people on the ground understood the national security risk, even when their elected officials didn't. Biden's Commerce Department banned Chinese vehicle technology in September 2024. Cameras, GPS systems, remote controls, all of it. The justification was simple. Cars today are computers on wheels. They collect data constantly. They connect to the internet for updates. They have microphones and location tracking built in. If a foreign adversary controls that hardware and software, they control your vehicle. The threat isn't theoretical. It's built into the hardware sitting in showrooms right now. Over 80% of EVs sold in Australia are Chinese made. In the US, lawmakers from both parties called Chinese EVs an existential threat to the domestic auto industry, not because of price competition, because of what's embedded in the technology itself. Ford filed a patent in 2023 for remote disabling of vehicle services. GWM models sold globally have built-in immobilizers that can shut down the car if unauthorized use is detected. The technology to remotely disable vehicles exists right now. It's not science fiction. Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, accused Elon Musk of remotely disabling his Cybertruck in Ukraine. The claim's unverified, but it shows the threat model everyone's thinking about. If you build remote access into vehicles, someone will eventually use it for purposes you didn't intend. Here's my crew chief take on this. You wouldn't let a rival racing team wire your telemetry system. You wouldn't give them access to your engine management software. You wouldn't let them install cameras in your garage. Why? Because they'd use that access against you the first chance they got. So why are we letting an adversary wire our cars' brains? Why are we licensing their battery technology and depending on their supply chains? The answer is we got lazy, we got cheap, and we assumed geopolitics wouldn't matter in a globalized economy. That assumption just died. Manufacturing concentration is bad enough. But the raw materials themselves come from places that make this supply chain even more fragile, and that's where the real nightmare begins. Cobalt, 70% of it comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Most of that gets refined in China. The DRC isn't exactly known for political stability. Forced labor concerns are documented. Environmental regulations are practically non-existent. And the entire global supply of cobalt for EV batteries flows through this single country that could collapse into chaos tomorrow. Lithium's not much better. Australia mines over 50% of the world's lithium, but China refines it into battery-grade material. South America has the lithium triangle: Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, massive reserves, also massive nationalization risks. Bolivia's government has a history of seizing foreign mining operations. Chile's considering constitutional changes that could hand lithium extraction to state-owned companies. Argentina's economy swings wildly depending on who's in power. You're building a $50,000 vehicle that depends on materials from countries where the rules change overnight. Graphite creates another pressure point. China controls 70% of natural graphite supply globally. In 2023, they imposed export restrictions specifically targeting battery-grade graphite. Not all graphite, just the stuff that goes into EV batteries. That's surgical economic warfare, and it worked. Prices spiked, supply chains scrambled, nickel processing is concentrated in Indonesia, but Chinese companies own the infrastructure. They built the refineries. They control the output. Indonesia has the ore in the ground, but Beijing decides who gets the processed nickel and at what price. Here's the fragility nobody wants to admit. One trade war, one coup, one export ban, your battery's raw materials disappear overnight. Not gradually, not with warning, overnight. Diversification efforts exist on paper. Lynas in Australia is expanding rare earth processing. MP Materials in the US is building separation facilities. Canada's developing the Nechalacho deposit. These projects need $25 to $30 per kilogram neodymium prices just to survive. Recent prices dropped 40%. When the economics don't work, investors walk away. The timelines are brutal. We're looking at 5 to 10 years before meaningful capacity comes online outside China, assuming perfect execution. No permitting delays, no environmental lawsuits, no financing gaps. In my 30 years in racing, I've never seen a complex engineering project hit its optimistic timeline. Never. Meanwhile, China's not standing still. They're increasing stockpiles. They're consolidating state control over domestic production. They're extending quotas to imported raw materials, meaning Even if you mine it elsewhere, you're still dependent on Chinese processing to make it usable. The real world impact: if China cuts off materials tomorrow, US EV production flatlines in weeks, not months, weeks. Assembly lines go dark because there's no inventory buffer for these materials. Just-in-time manufacturing works great until your single supplier decides to play geopolitics. The materials crisis and the manufacturing crisis aren't separate problems. They're the same problem at different points in the supply chain. And now we need to talk about what happens when these vulnerabilities get weaponized, because that's already started. April 2025, China restricted rare earth processing technology exports as direct retaliation for US semiconductor controls. Those 30 to 60-day approval delays I mentioned earlier, that was the opening move. Beijing showed they could slow down global EV production without firing a shot, without imposing formal sanctions, just by adding paperwork and approval processes to critical materials. This isn't hypothetical economic theory. It's happening right now. The Biden Commerce Department didn't ban Chinese cars because of tariffs or trade imbalances. They banned them because cars are computers on wheels. Every modern vehicle has cameras recording the road, microphones picking up conversations, GPS tracking every location, internet connectivity for software updates. If a foreign adversary controls that hardware and software, they control a mobile surveillance and sabotage platform. Ramzan Kadyrov claimed Elon Musk remotely disabled his Cybertruck in Ukraine. The story is unverified, but it doesn't matter if it's true. What matters is the technology exists to make it true. Ford filed a patent in 2023 for remote disabling of vehicle services. GM vehicles sold globally have built-in immobilizers that can shut down the car remotely. The capability is already installed in millions of vehicles on the road today. Think about the threat model. A foreign government could theoretically disable vehicles during a conflict, not just military vehicles, civilian cars, trucks, delivery vans. Imagine a trade dispute escalating and suddenly every Chinese-made EV in Australia stops working. Over 80% of EVs sold, they're Chinese manufactured. That's not a minor inconvenience. That's critical infrastructure collapse. U.S. lawmakers from both parties called Chinese EVs an existential threat to the American auto industry. Marco Rubio, before he became Secretary of State, led the charge against CATL. He demanded Pentagon blacklisting and CFIUS review of Ford's licensing deal. The national security establishment understood what most consumers still don't. When you import vehicles with embedded foreign technology, you're importing a potential weapons system. The remote control risks go beyond disabling vehicles. Modern cars collect massive amounts of data: driving patterns, locations visited, voice recordings from hands-free calls, biometric data from driver monitoring systems. All of that flows back to manufacturers through internet connectivity. If those manufacturers answer to Beijing, that data becomes intelligence collection at scale. Australia is dealing with this reality right now. Chinese-made EVs dominate their market. Their government's trying to figure out what data is being transmitted back to China and whether they can even audit the software to find out. The answer so far, they can't. The code's proprietary. The data flows are encrypted. They're flying blind on what information is leaving their country. Here's the crew chief reality check. In racing, you control every single component on your car because one compromised part kills the whole vehicle. You don't let rival teams supply your electronics. You don't let them wire your telemetry. You don't give them access to your data systems. Why? Because they'll use that access to beat you. Same logic applies here. When you depend on an adversary for critical vehicle components, you've handed them leverage they will eventually use. Not might use, will use. The only question is timing. China's already shown they're willing to weaponize supply chains, rare earth export controls, graphite restrictions, processing technology approvals. These aren't market dynamics. These are calculated moves in a larger geopolitical competition. The threats are real. The vulnerabilities are built into millions of vehicles already on the road. And now we need to talk about what this actually costs you as a buyer, because the ownership nightmare is just beginning. Battery replacement costs run $5,000 to $20,000 depending on pack size. That's today's price with functioning supply chains. Add supply shortages from trade restrictions or material embargoes, and those costs double. Or replacement becomes impossible entirely because the cells simply aren't available. Your warranty becomes worthless overnight. Manufacturers promise 8 to 10 year battery coverage. But if Chinese materials or cells get sanctioned, they can't honor those warranties. The parts don't exist. The supply chain's been cut. You're stuck with a degraded battery and no legal recourse because the warranty terms include force majeure clauses for geopolitical events. Resale value collapses the moment buyers realize replacement batteries might not exist in 5 years. Who's buying a used EV when there's no guarantee you can fix it? The secondary market for these vehicles evaporates. So you're holding an asset that depreciates faster than any car in history because the fundamental components have uncertain availability. Charging infrastructure carries the same vulnerability. Tesla superchargers use Chinese-made components. Other charging networks rely heavily on Chinese hardware. One export ban, one trade restriction, and the charging network you depend on stops expanding. Existing chargers break down without replacement parts. Your vehicle's range becomes theoretical because the infrastructure to support it disappears. Solid-state batteries won't save you. Toyota promises them in 2025 or 2026. Samsung says 2027, even if they deliver on time, and they won't. Those batteries still need rare earth elements for the motors. The propulsion system hasn't changed. You've just swapped one supply chain vulnerability for another, and scaling solid-state production takes a decade minimum. We've heard these promises before. Here's the smart play. Plug-in hybrids reduce battery size by 70%. They cut rare earth dependency significantly. They maintain drivetrain redundancy. If one system fails, you've got a backup. The engineering is proven. The supply chains are diversified. You're not betting your entire vehicle on geopolitically sensitive materials. True enthusiasts should avoid full EVs until supply chains diversify. That's not happening in 2 years or 5 years. We're talking a decade plus timeline if everything goes perfectly. Until then, you're buying an expensive appliance that might become unrepairable the moment international relations deteriorate. The performance DNA argument doesn't hold up either. Yeah, EVs have instant torque and impressive acceleration numbers, but when the battery degrades and you can't replace it, that performance is gone. A hybrid might not hit 60 in 3 seconds, but it'll still be running in 10 years when half the EVs on the road today are sitting in driveways with dead battery packs nobody can source. The EV market sold you range and performance, but hid the supply chain time bomb ticking underneath. If you're buying now, hybrids are the safe bet. Full EVs are a gamble on geopolitics you can't control. These supply chain vulnerabilities aren't theoretical. They're already killing brands. Watch my breakdown of 7-car brands that will soon completely vanish to see which manufacturers can't survive this crisis.